Good evening, everyone. There we go. So as you know, we're in our series looking at authority and power, and the topic I've got tonight is about authority as fathers and mothers. And I'm in my late 30s now. I know, I still look 12, but I am actually in my late 30s, and I feel like I've been preparing for this talk for probably the last 30 or so of these years. I've only been a parent for the last 7. But for those of you who know me and my journey with this, when I married Mel, and even before I married Mel, there were conversations about whether I did or didn't really want children. The good news is, now that I've got 2, I can say that I do want them. So, bonus. But there was definitely a debate in my mind as to whether I wanted children. I think deep down, I probably really did. But I think I was quite fearful of what it meant to be a parent and to have authority over little lives and to bring them up. My great fear was how many years of therapy my kids may need with me as their parent. I grappled with the enormity of the responsibility of being responsible for someone's life and for bringing them up and shaping them and inputting them and hoping that they turn out well and having to do quite well myself, hopefully, as an example for that. So I feel like I've been preparing for this for quite some time. I don't, however, feel like I am an expert in this, as you will hear from some of the stories I may share later. I definitely don't get it right all the time. In fact, Nikki came to pick me up earlier, and Joa, my youngest, who's 5, was sat. He was supposed to be sat on the bottom step having a little think about some things, and I was supposed to be having a chat with him. It wasn't going well. Nikki turns up at the door, ready to pick me up, to come down here to talk on this subject. So I don't know whether God's just been having a little bit of a joke with me recently, but it's been challenging for the last few weeks as I've really been thinking about this. One of the things we have seen recently here is we've had a few dedications. Anyone go to those? We've had quite a lot of children dedicated. And one of the promises we make together as a church family, most of it is about the promises that parents make and maybe some grandparents, but there is a promise in there for us as church and as community, and we agree in those promises, if we answer that we will, we agree that we will be part of helping to raise the child and supporting those parents. There is, the African proverb, isn't there, that it takes a community or a village to raise a child, and it is true. I definitely, and between me and Mel, I can speak on her behalf for this, between just the 2 of us, we don't have everything we need to input into our children. I don't think any parents would ever say that they've got everything they need just contained within them to ensure that their children have absolutely everything they ever need. It is true that it takes a community to bring up children. So if you're here tonight and you don't yet have children, or you've got rid of your children by now, they've left home, gone off to university, whatever it might be, left, got their own house, got married, had their own family, you still get to be included because this community has a role to play with just my children. Joa's quite hectic. You can all parent him, and me and Mel, no. We'll just focus on the other one. No, we need help with both. They both have their moments. We have our moments and we have our failings, and we need the entire community. So everyone, whether you have children or not, whether you plan to have children or not, whether you've had them and they've gone, you still have a role to play. In our family, in this family, in your own family, however extended it might be, we have a role to play as mothers and fathers. And on top of that, we also have a spiritual role as fathers and mothers in the world. We are parented by God himself. So what happened in my life was I was parented by my parents. I became the person I am largely as a result of that and a few other influences. And now I'm passing on the stuff that I've learned into my children. We have God as our Heavenly Father, and there is a role for us in then passing on that parenting that we receive to a world that needs it. Romans 8:19 talks about how the world waits in eager expectation for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed, and it is waiting for us to step up in our role as spiritual fathers and mothers. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be directly related to my parenting of my children, because that is obviously my context and where I can draw from. And there will obviously be elements of how God has fathered me in it. But for us, whether you've got children or not, the context is that we still have a role. So this talk is relevant, basically. Pay attention. There are a few key scriptures. You can follow along if you like. We're going to read Ephesians 6, 1 and 4. We might read 1, 2, 4. You never know. Might include verses 2 and 3. And then we're going to read 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 11 and 12. And I am going to read a few bits out from different translations as well. So a brief summary of Ephesians 6. This is verses 1 and 4. But 1 to 4 in the NIV says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." In the Message, it puts it like this. It says, "Children, do what your parents tell you. This is only right." And then verse 4, "Fathers, don't exasperate your children by coming down hard on them. Take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the master." Or in the New Living, "Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from God." And then in 1 Thessalonians, this is talking about, Paul's talking about his example to the Thessalonians, that he dealt with them as a father would, and then he gives the description of what a father does. So he says, "For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." Or in the Message, "With each of you we were like a father with his child, holding your hand, whispering encouragement, showing you step by step how to live well before God, who called us into his own kingdom, into this delightful life." I don't know if you spotted in there, the weight of responsibility is quite unevenly matched. Did you spot it? For children, here's the list of what children have to do. And I'm counting, the honoring father and mother into this one. It's the obey. That's it. They honor and they obey their parents. In Scripture, it mentions in these verses fathers particularly, but it is for parents. So fathers or parents, you don't provoke to anger or exasperate. Don't be hard on them. Discipline them, train them, instruct them, take them by the hand and lead them in God's ways. Encourage them, comfort them, urge them to live worthy lives. Show them step by step through your example and help them to know and be part of God's call and live into God's kingdom. It's quite a long list. Can't say it in one breath. Children, it seems, have got it easy. If only it were that easy, eh? If only it were that easy and they would obey. The part that the child has to play may sound, less onerous. And actually, I think when we come with the understanding that the parent has to do all of this, surely in that context, it's much easier for a child to obey. It's much easier to obey when you know the person you're having to obey is not meant to make you angry, exasperate you. Their role is to instruct and train and lead you in God's ways and take you by the hand and demonstrate step by step and encourage you and comfort you and urge you on and help you into God's kingdom call. You'd think it would be easy in that context when we know that the person that we're called to obey has all of that for us and their best for that child. And yet, we clearly know that that's what God does for us. And how often do we disobey? I have to remind myself of that when my children start not doing the things I ask them to do. That I, as a grown adult, can't even manage it with God. Why am I surprised that my 5-year-old, who's overtired and hungry and grumpy, can't do it as well? The role of a parent is definitely not an easy one. The children don't come with a manual. It is a lifelong journey of learning how to be a parent and getting it wrong and picking yourselves up and trying again and doing the best we can. The context biblically for bringing up children in the ideal scenario is within family. Scripture talks about it quite regularly, and family starts with a marriage. Anyone who's been to a wedding, the husband or to be and the wife to be, you'll hear more on this next week. I'm not going to steal Joy's talk. She's speaking on this, I think. But when they make their vows, The promises they make contain the words, I will do this, not you will. And the thing is, with this as the foundation into which children are meant to be brought up, I think there is an element in which that also needs to be our stance with our children. The biggest part, perhaps, of our parenting is what we model together. The way I interact with Mel, the way that I honor her and encourage her and share stuff with her has got to be the foundation for what my children see and what I expect them to grow into. If I try and tell my children to share and to be honoring and kind and encouraging, and then I don't do that, what are they going to pick up? What are they going to learn? They will learn far more through what I model than through the words that I say alone. So if my relationship with Mel, the person that I profess to love the most, the person that I stood before God and said, I will love, I will cherish, till death us do part, and all those kind of things. If I've made those promises and then I live differently and I tell my kids, they've got to live the way I've said, but not the way that I do, it doesn't work. Modeling is a biblical principle. But the I will and the not you will is also the same with the kids. I have to, if I tell them, you've got to share, I've got to live by that. Now, when Bethia was about probably 18 months old, she was quite young, she was in that stage where sharing was quite a challenge. All children go through this. It's quite a challenge. We were in that process of trying to encourage her and teach her to share. And then Mel happened to be given a bag of sweets. And Bethia happened to spot this. And she went, Mummy, share. It's quite clever, I thought. You know, not, can I have one? Give me one. Share. Genius. They see not only what we say, they hear that, but they see what we do. Mel was in this, I've got to do it now, haven't I? And we have. We have to live by the standards that we set for our children. It's not very common for people to learn just by being told. That wasn't how Jesus taught his disciples. It's not how most of us get taught in classrooms these days. May have been once upon a time. But it isn't. We need to see and to experience. And that's part of our rationale behind Shine, which is our all-age family meeting in the mornings. Part of our rationale behind that, aside from God giving us prophetic words and those kind of things about it, but we want to model for our kids our relationship with God. It would be a lot easier, I have to say, as a parent with young kids, to send them off somewhere else to Sunday school and me listen to a nice adult talk, feel nice and fed, and go home at the end of it. It is not always easy, and certainly when the kids were a little bit younger, those stages were really challenging. And for Mel in particular, I remember because she doesn't get to come to the evening meeting very often, because I'm here quite a lot and have to do stuff. She definitely found it a challenge. Felt like half the time, if not more, we were just running around policing our kids because they weren't engaged and they were just at that age where it wasn't quite right for them. But having done that, having engaged with them, I'll tell you, things are different. My relationship with God really didn't get going and I didn't find my own feet with it probably until I came to university. Now, I'd lived as a Christian in my house at home with my parents. I'd gone to church, but it wasn't until I stepped out onto my own 2 feet that I saw something of my own personal relationship with God develop. And yet my kids at 5 and 7 are probably in their relationship with God where I was when I came to university at age 18. My kids pray, they prophesy, they hear God. They don't just do it on a Sunday, they do it at home. And it's because, I think, we're beginning to live life differently. We're modeling something as family together. We're engaging and we're investing in them. And it happens because we've chosen to do something to invest in them. And it is a biblical model. You can look through Scripture, and any time a prophet turned up or messenger of God turned up to speak to the people, they were all there. Men, women, and children. The whole assembly of God. I don't want my children to get a second-hand message from God when they can hear it firsthand. And so, that modeling that we do there is part of why Shine exists. It's reflective, I think, of God's heart for family and for community. You know, when we moved here as a church into this building, we received a prophetic word that it would be like a family has come to town. And modeling family together, being together as community, sharing children, if you like, having that extended family so it isn't just the immediate, but beyond, that supportive network. And I think we're beginning to come into some of that. And it is being noticed. I know stories from within our community where stories are heard of what happens in our meetings and how family we are, and how this is a place where you can come and you know you're going to be welcomed and accepted. So much of what our children learn from us is based on what they see. And beyond Sundays, and Shine, it clearly is biblical. Part of my role as a parent is to pass on the things that I have in me, the skills that I've got. So I quite like DIY. I quite like doing stuff and projects. And if there's stuff to be done, I don't want to get somebody else in to do it. If I don't know what I'm doing, I'll learn. And my kids help me. Probably not a wise thing, but the day after surgery, I built a hutch for the guinea pigs that we were just buying. My kids helped. Remodeled our shed, built it into it, put a little tunnel through it into the run, and my kids have learned stuff about that. My kids know how to use tools. That's something in me that I get to pass on. I get to model it. How we care for our world. My heart for justice. I get to demonstrate these things and model it. I can't just tell my kids to be kind to other people and then not do it. And it's not just true of our behavior. I mean, I find myself shouting occasionally at my kids, "Stop shouting!" And then catching myself thinking, what am I modeling in that moment? It happens more than I'd like to admit. And I'm sure there are a few parents out there giggling already. We've all got examples of it, haven't we? Sometimes you feel like it's the only way to get through. But there's more than just my actions. There is the inspiring to faith. There's no point me telling my kids that if you've got an issue, take it to God, if when I've got an issue, I just run around and try and fix it myself, which I am all too tempted to do. What we model is vitally important. And I find that as I've been parenting my children, that actually I'm very much still growing myself and I'm still learning. Part of what I need to teach my children is that it's okay to not have all the answers. Because kids, naturally, when they are very young, they expect you to have all the answers. They think you have all the answers, and they think you are the best thing, on the planet, which is scary in itself, their lack of discernment. And so I find that as I'm growing up my kids, that one of the things they need to see in me is that it's okay to not have the answers, but to know where to find them, and to find them in God, and to begin to reach for him. A lot of my parenting, I found that when I've engaged with God over it, it's focused on me. It's focused on things that I've needed to get resolved in my life. And there are times when we need to be vulnerable with our kids over those things. It's okay. And it's okay to say sorry when we've messed up. Sometimes we find that hard, don't we? When we're parenting a child and you get slightly over angry maybe, you see the red mist rise as they're doing something they shouldn't, and you react beyond how you should, disproportionately maybe. And sometimes we feel like we've got to remain justified. But it is okay to say sorry to our kids. Because unless we model that, how is it that they're going to learn to say sorry and to own up to the mistakes that they make? It's okay that the relationship is two-way. I learn from my kids regularly. They teach me a lot. It's not a one-way street, but it has to be said that it's not equal either. Our kids need us to be parents. They don't need us to be an older brother. They don't need us to be a friend. They might need that at times within the context of our being their parents. They need parents. And so that encouragement, that comfort, that helping, that not angering has to work in tandem with things like discipline and correction and instruction. If we only do the former, if we only do the light and fluffy stuff, if we only encouraged, comforted, and gave our children everything they asked for, it's not hard to see how they could be spoilt, how they could get to that stage where, they live with the expectation that everything should just come to them. They shouldn't have to work or try, it just happens. It's easy to see how they might then not be prepared to cope with the world around. And we know discipline isn't pleasant. As a parent, you don't like giving discipline. As a child, you don't like receiving it. It's not great fun most of the time. It's a bit like, going for a run in the rain. It's not always fun. I hate running. It's never fun for me. But if you're going to run a marathon, you need the discipline. You have to get out, come rain or come shine, and it quite literally pays off in the long run. Discipline is an important thing here in the boundaries that we need to create with our children. Our challenge as parents is to do the complete package, to be loving, comforting, caring, to discipline, to train, to instruct. But to do it in such a way that breeds respect rather than fear, that makes us the place that our children want to run to when they're in trouble or when they're hurt or when they've got something to celebrate, when they've got good news to share, when they want to rant or express their emotions. Because ultimately that's what God wants for us, isn't it? That when we're hurt, when we've done something wrong, when we're excited about something, that we run to him, not away. And for that, there is a vulnerability that is required. We need to make ourselves approachable. We need to provide the two-way street, just as God has done. He made himself vulnerable. He sacrificed everything. That sweet stuff that we love needs a mold, and so discipline has to go along with it. And for us as children of God, the question is, are we willing to accept it when it comes? Is he the place we will run regardless? And so while our relationship with our kids may not be one way, and our relationship with God may not be one way, it's clearly not totally equal, and boundaries are necessary. And if we fail to put those appropriate boundaries in place and don't stick to them, or hold our children to them when we need to, we dishonor them. Because boundaries communicate the value for what's inside. We value our homes and the contents of them, probably more so than we value what's outside them and in our neighbours' homes. I value my TV more than my next door neighbours because it's mine. It's the one I watch, and if it went missing, what would I do? No. We value our neighbourhood more than others. Certainly people on the Flowers Estate, there is a sense of identity about being part of the Flowers Estate. You can live anywhere else in Southampton, but the Flowers Estate is the best. We value our city as a boundary. We're from Southampton. We've talked about how great it is already. We don't like Portsmouth as much, maybe. It's not true. We love Portsmouth too. But let's be honest, if something great were going to come to the south coast, where would you want it? You want it here, because we've placed value in the boundary that we've created for our city. It would be the same with our nation. We create a value when we put boundaries around things. Boundaries are essential for our kids and for our roles as parents. Our creating safe and appropriate boundaries brings security, it brings safety, it brings honor, it brings value to our kids. It brings respect, and it helps all of us grow. There are boundaries in our relationships. There are things that, I'm married to Mel. There is a boundary around that relationship. Others don't get invited into some of those things that Mel and I do. No sniggering. But it's true. There are boundaries around my family. Loads of people come in and through our house, but there are times when it's just us as family because we have to have those boundaries. And that gives value. Boundaries are not wrong. They're not there to be abused, but they are there to help us in the way we parent. And those boundaries, some people think that they are difficult to maintain. and there are children who are just unruly. But there is no such thing as a child who can't accept a boundary or can't be disciplined. I think if ever you've watched the TV series Super Nanny, you will know this. Some of the kids that have been on that program and the way they treat their parents, it's quite shocking. I thought until recently, when I experienced some of it myself from my own children. But in that program, one of the main things she does is set boundaries and ensures discipline's in place. And there's dramatic transformation. Now, the hope is for us, whether in our relationship with God or with our children or in community, that things don't stray that far that it's necessary to get Super Nanny in. But we do need those boundaries and we do need discipline. God has placed in boundaries for us, and discipline is necessary. Now, discipline is probably one of our biggest challenges. I don't know about anybody else, but how we discipline and model grace at the same time can be quite difficult. I think one of our roles as parents in our discipline is to draw out the true identity of our children. Discipline is not meant to be about punishment. Discipline is not meant to be simply about maintaining control, which unfortunately, when parents are tired and it's been a long week, it's easy to go that route, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's easy, probably, to get to that point where you think, our children are misbehaving, I just want to restore some control and some order, and our discipline comes across as punishment. But it isn't meant to be about punishment. It's meant to be about drawing out something deeper, something greater. This quote from L.R. Nost, she's, you can go look her up, but she's quite well known in the world of parenting and the like. There is more to what we hope for. We don't just want mindless obedience. God never wanted just mindless obedience with us. He wants of our free will that we might choose. He doesn't just want compliance. What's the point in that? He could have built robots. He wants something bigger and something deeper. And it's got to be true of what we want for our kids too. There are times when I just want my kids to do what I ask them to do. But ultimately, that's not how I want them to end up, just doing whatever they're told. I want them to end up, courageous. I want them to end up resourceful, humorous. I want them to be creative in finding solutions to stuff. I want them to change the world. And that takes more than mindless compliance. We're called to draw the best out of our children. Now, this is my son, Joe. I'm going a little story to focus on him. It's not because Bethy is perfect in every way, but because I've had a few challenges with Joe recently. You will notice there, you can't quite read it, but he's got a load of stickers on him, which he got at school, all of which are respect stickers. 6 of them. For every 3, he got a sweet. He got 2 sweets that day. He must be like the most pleasant kid in the world to teach, respecting his teachers. You wouldn't know it at home. You would sometimes. Don't get me wrong, he is genuinely lovely. Like, I put him to bed last night, and we were talking about what he might want for breakfast in the morning. And I said, well, I can make some pancakes, and we've got a few sausages, throw something together. And he was like, thank you, Dad, that's great. And thanks for the fry up this morning. It was like properly lovely. Night, I'm going to go to sleep now, And I've chatted with people who during this period where he has been quite challenging and telling me how lovely he is. Like, he'll hold open a door for someone and they'll walk through and say thank you. And he go, you're very welcome. And he's like the model child in public sometimes. So I don't know whether this is just, God having a joke or it being coincidental, but since I knew that I was speaking on this topic, Joe has been quite challenging. He is a sweet, kind, loving bundle of joy, but at times he's not. And he's going through a really aggressive phase, threatening verbally and physically, actually as well. So he'll threaten to punch you, he'll threaten to cut your head off, which is less pleasant. He hasn't actually done that one yet, fortunately. But he threatens, waves his fist at you, and he will actually hit. Usually, if something doesn't quite go his way, if he loses a game, I don't know, if the TV show he wanted to watch isn't on, like I have any control over that. If he's done something wrong and he knows it and he's going to get disciplined. He's going through quite a lot. He makes quite a lot of threats. He will, if you tell him, give him a consequence to something, he said, well, if you do that, I'll do this. And he escalates quite quickly. And it's been really regular. Now, not last week, the week before, there was an incident. Many parents will relate to this. It's the bedtime. It's when it goes wrong. Your kids are tired. So we're getting the kids upstairs. Joa has been threatening. He's been waving his fist. He's verbally, I can't even remember what he said, but it wasn't very pleasant. And he's continuing to do so. So I calmly, to start with, explain to him that his behavior is not okay. It's not communicating value to us, as you do. And I talked about some consequences. I said, look, Joe, if you can't stop with the way you're behaving, he was threatening Beth here as well, which wasn't particularly good. She'd done nothing wrong in this particular occasion, not always. I said, if you carry on, we won't be doing bedtime stories, okay? I asked him if he understood. He said, yes. And then kicked the bathroom door. Not a great improvement. I said, I'm going to give you another chance because you probably haven't quite had the moment to calm down. So I'm going to give you another chance. And he carried on. And I think it got worse for Beth. At that point, we had to remove her from the situation because he started threatening her for something. And then I said, okay, Joe, we're not going to be doing stories tonight at the moment. As it stands, we're not doing stories. You might be able to get them back if you can change your behavior. I would love to do stories with you, but at the moment, that's not happening. Mel and Beth here at this point, they're off in our bedroom, snuggled up in our bed, having a lovely time reading stories. And Joa, next thing he does, he slams the toilet seat quite hard. Shakes his fist, angry face, starts making horrible kind of noises at me. And I'm thinking, this is going well. Parenthood at its best. I am drawing out the child that I've always dreamed of. Maybe had nightmares of, I don't know. Anyway, it's getting worse, it's escalating, and at the point where I managed to get him out of the bathroom and say, look, I gave you a chance to get these stories back to, to change, and you haven't done it. He then collapses in our hallway into a 5-year-old ball of snot. Wailing, shouting, screaming. The threats escalate at this point, along with a mixture of begging and pleading. Please, I want stories. And at this point, I'm thinking, where do I go? Because I want to demonstrate and show him grace. But I can't, as a parent. How do you then, when you're trying to bring discipline, genuinely, I need to know the answers to this because I haven't got it. I'm thinking, I've said, you can't behave like this, and this might be the consequence. This will be the consequence of that, and he's not done it. How can I then say, oh, it's all right, you can have it anyway? What does he learn from that? That he can carry on behaving however he wants, and then just turn on the tears at the end. Because what he was sad about was that he was not getting the stories. He wasn't sad about what he'd done or how he'd treated people or the threats that he'd given. And I'm thinking, I'm having this conversation with God in my head going, please, God, I just need a little bit of wisdom. Help. Managed to get him into his bedroom, and he's still begging and pleading and crying and occasionally threatening. And we have a chat about his behavior. And he begins to calm down slightly. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, if he can just demonstrate something of, that he's changed or good behavior or not threatening me for the next little bit, we'll get it sorted and I'll be able to give him a story. So I then ask him, he's not been to the toilet yet. I'm not even sure if he's done his teeth, can't remember. But I ask him to go to the toilet and then come back. And I was thinking, if you could just do that, we're home and dry. I could do a story. That'd be it. It'd be lovely. He comes straight in with the begging and the pleading and the bargaining. If I do that, can I have a story? And I'm like, it's not quite the deal. I'm trying to demonstrate grace, not you earning something. Could you just do it? And we'll see what happens without asking. The begging continues. He walks into the bathroom eventually, begrudgingly, smashes the toilet seat up into the system, slams it down again, turns the tap on so hard the bathroom's soaked, and stomps back into the bedroom. And I'm there thinking, I'm speaking on this. What am I going to say? Managed to get him up into his bed. It's a bunk bed thing, so he's up high. It's an effort to get him up the stairs. Every step there's begging and pleading. Eventually he's up there. I can hear Mel and Bethia giggling away, having a wonderful time. I'm thinking, what have I done to deserve this? And eventually, I'm chatting away with him, and it's still not going anywhere. And I'm still thinking, how on earth am I going to demonstrate grace in this? And I'm thinking, so often, I'm sure I behave this way with God. I get myself in a bit of a strop over something. It's all God's fault, definitely. It's not anything I've done. It's his fault, always. And I asked Joa at that point, I said, look, Joa, what would you do in this situation? If I'd behave like this to you, what would you do? And he went, I wouldn't read you a story. Suddenly, it's almost like something clicked, that he realized what his behavior had meant. And we chat a bit further, and he calms down. He genuinely then says sorry, and I read him a story. And he actually goes to bed happy, miraculously, and I go down, collapse in a heap downstairs, and need intravenous wine. But, eventually that happens. And, most parents will probably recognize that story. They've probably got their own. Insert child name here. All of us have probably got that story to tell if we've got kids. And you probably also thinking, as you're listening to that story, there's moments where you think, I know what's going to happen there. When I said about there being this consequence, you're thinking, oh, I wouldn't have done that. Been there a few times. Just let that one go. And the truth is, I am not a perfect parent. The truth is also, my child is probably not giving me a hard time. They're probably having a hard time. Joa was tired. He was struggling to cope with stuff. He's clearly been going through stuff at the moment because it's not an isolated thing. This week he's been a lot better. I don't entirely know why it was, whether he's having a growth spurt or a hormone surge, or he's just really insecure at the start of term and he's struggling with a new workload. I don't know. But the truth is, it is a two-way thing. And when Joa got stressed and tired, he reacted in a certain way, and my parenting is not perfect. It's true for all of us. I'm quite a productive person on the whole. I'm good at delegating. I'm good at maybe giving tasks to others and leading people through stuff, and if stuff needs doing, I can show people how to do stuff. But when I am stressed and when things and I'm looking at my diary and thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get it all done, I stop delegating to other people, and I return to my weaknesses, and I take it all on board myself, thinking it'd be just much quicker if I do it myself. We all do it. Joa is kind and caring and loving and genuinely empathetic. He was sat watching TV with Mel the other day, and there was a dad and a kid, and they were mourning the loss of his mum. And Joa started crying on the sofa because he recognized how sad it was. He's genuinely empathetic. And yet in those moments, he reverted to those areas of weakness and became the opposite. Part of my role as his dad is to try and draw out his true identity. I'm imperfect, my children are imperfect, and the outcome results on both of us. So no matter how well I parent, because I have an imperfect child still, I may not get the results right. The truth is, we have a perfect Father in heaven. And let's be honest, we're not all perfect children, are we? Because that relationship is two-way. We have a role to play in being fathered by God. The good news is God is with us in it no matter what. He is a good, good Father, and we are loved. That's who we are. That is our identity. And there's grace for us in the process, whether we're parents or not. But the best thing we can do for our children and for that world outside those doors that is watching is to allow ourselves to be actively, intentionally, purposefully fathered by God. To deliberately put ourselves in his path, to allow him to discipline us, to challenge us, to train us, to instruct us, to take us by the hand and show us the way. Because when we do that and when we begin to live that way, we will then have what it takes and the authority and the power to be spiritual fathers and mothers to the world around. As we pursue God and learn what it is to be obedient children, that's where we find our authority. We have the position as his children. We need the authority of sitting in obedience under him. That's what that story of the centurion's servant teaches us. Authority comes from not only positioning, but our obedience and our willingness to do as our Father says. And certainly one of the keys I've found for my kids is that when I am actively engaged with God, when I am living as part of that big adventure of his calling in the kingdom, that I am more able to cope, I am more able to communicate grace, I am more able to bring them what they need. And I found it in my kids, actually, that with Joa, he loves a task. If I can help him to live in an adventure and live beyond what he can handle on his own, everything shifts. His focus moves away from himself, and he becomes that kind, caring, empathetic, loving child who gives. And so my challenge, I guess, tonight is, are we willing to live that big adventure? Are we willing to put ourselves in the way of God's discipline and live as obedient children in order that we can be spiritual fathers and mothers in the world? Because that is what the world needs, and that is what God has for us as his purpose and his calling for our lives. I'm done. Thanks.